UCLA in Los Angeles, and I run the marmot study that's been going on. This is our 59th year of following the fate of individual marmots. It's longer than I think any of the longest running soap operas. So and it is a soap opera because we study social behavior. And for anyone that's been up in the Upper East River Valley, we work about a 5-kilometer section of the Upper East River Valley where we try to mark and identify and observe marmots throughout their lives. So yellow-bellied marmots are harem polygynous, meaning that a male wants to have many wives, and most of the females have only one male. They are socially variable, and they are found in a wide range of group sizes. So typically you have like one male and one female and maybe some offspring, but you can have areas, colonies with 30, 40, 50 animals living on a hillside in one area. And within that, they can structure themselves into family groups, but individuals also may interact more widely. Marmots have a tough life. They freeze to death in the winter and they get killed by things in the summer. Not a lot of predation except on pups. So when the babies come out, they feed everybody, which is, I guess, good for everybody, not good for the marmots. And groups vary in exposure to predators. But their main problem is really surviving winter. And to survive winter, they have to eat a lot. And animals will double their body mass, in the summer from what they come out after hibernation. They are active, well, I'll tell you that in a moment. So there's an annual cycle. They emerge from hibernation in April and May. And if it's still snow covered, which it is in many years, less so now than before, they continue to lose body mass because they're up, they're active, but there's nothing to eat. Sometimes we see them eating trees. Sometimes we see them eating bark. I mean, this is even before the leaves are out on the aspen trees. And if it's a really big winter, the way it was a couple of years ago, we have spring mortality because they're dying, they're starving to death. When we say that when 50% of the group's been seen, we say the group's emerged. And then the growing season, we sort of define starting when there's about half the snow's gone in these areas where they live. And why do you study marmots? Well, you know where they live. They have addresses. So we can go to places that are snow covered, but we knew the marmots were there last year. And their burrows they live in are really important resources, and they're found in the same place. So they breed. Sometimes they breed before they emerge, based on when we see the pups from the snow. Sometimes they breed under the snow, but often they come out. Males come out first, and males go around and try to wake up females. Sometimes males are hibernating with females. Sometimes males are hibernating alone. Sometimes males find dried plants somewhere under the snow and bring flowers to females when they wake them up. And then they mate, and mostly underground. We don't really see a lot of that. And then they probably have about a 30-day gestation, and they nurse their offspring for about 25 days. And then the babies start coming up. And right now is a crazy time for us because we expect the babies are going to be coming up any day now. And you may hear a radio call while I'm talking because, if we find babies up. When the babies come up, we desperately try to catch them all because they are prey to pretty much everything. If foxes are around, foxes eat them, coyotes eat them, birds of prey, red-tailed hawks will get them. They're sort of silly and clumsy and bumble around. And the first day they come out, you can actually catch them with your hand. Now, when I say we catch them, we really don't try to hurt these animals. We want to study them throughout their lives. So after they survive their first hibernation, the babies, we call them yearlings. And right around the time, right before the babies are emerging, the pups are emerging, the animals may disperse. And right now, we started, we came out really late this year because we weren't allowed to come into the county and study the animals. So we missed all of spring, which is my favorite time here. But we were able to still get an idea of who survived because the animals, if they survive, they stick around for a while. Right now, they're moving. So right now, we're seeing animals all over the place that we hadn't seen before because they're dispersing, they're leaving home. Almost all of the male yearlings disperse, some of the females disperse. Pups are starting to emerge any day now and into July. And then basically marmots, the goal of a marmot is to gain mass and become obese. And that's good for them. And there are actually really interesting biomedical questions you can ask about this because unlike people, marmots double their body mass, but they don't get sick. People get sick. And people are studying, biomedical researchers are studying marmots to understand how you can get so fat and not get sick. And then they hibernate starting in September into October, where they are pretty much out for about 8 months, 7 or 8 months. And what hibernation is this really nifty adaptation that allows organisms to live in really harsh winter environments. So they don't have to eat, they're living off their body mass. And we've borrowed animals from the field. We've captured them in August and September and brought them to the University of Kansas and put them in basically a large walk-in freezer and turned off the lights and hibernated them. And then we borrowed them throughout the winter and looked at their metabolic rate, how much energy they were burning. And it turns out that these marmots burn, yellow-bellied marmots are the most efficient hibernators known, in the sense that when they're really in deep torpor, when they're really out, and when the temperature is right, when they're in what's called their thermal neutral zone, they're burning about 1 gram of fat a day, less than the weight of a paper clip every day for an animal that's bigger than a fat cat. So that's not a lot. But there's this really interesting phenomena whereby hibernating animals don't just go down and burn 1 gram of fat a day for 8 months. They wake up periodically. And there's sort of this unanswered question in hibernation physiology. And as a man, I sort of changed my opinion on this as I age. But are animals waking up to pee, or are they peeing because they're waking up? And that's a really interesting question, because even though your metabolic rate is really, really slow and you're not burning anything when you're in deep torpor, there's going to be some metabolic waste accumulating. And in order to pee, to urinate, you have to have blood pressure and filter it through your kidneys. However, the process of waking up is quite expensive. They burn a lot of energy doing that. And then they have to get rid of the waste, and then they go back down. So it's sort of, deep torpor for 10 or 14 days. They wake up, they pee, they go back down into deep torpor for 10 or 14 days. They wake up, they pee, and they sort of do that throughout the winter. And then they emerge in April or May. So we spend a lot of time observing marmots. We trap them, we live trap them. We make a bunch of measurements on them. We try to look at how big their hind foot is as a measure of structural growth, body size. We weigh them because mass accumulation is a hugely important thing in their lives. We collect poop because anytime you have an animal in your hand and if it poops, you can learn a lot from poop. So we can understand things about stress hormones and parasites from fecal samples. We take blood from the bigger animals and sometimes the smaller animals, and we look for parasites in the blood. We can look at hormones in the blood. We also can look at hormones in the feces, and we have a number of what are called non-invasive assays of hormones, including stress hormones. We do a lot with stress hormones. And then we spend a lot of time watching them, and we want to know who's where and what they're doing. We're really interested in social interactions, so when we see animals interacting with each other, we note down who did what to whom and who bounced away, so we can calculate dominance hierarchies from this. We can look at how individuals are related to each other socially. And then we do a lot of stuff with what are called social network statistics, where we look at, much as you would sort of think about, your Facebook friends, we sort of look at marmots' Facebook friends by trying to understand who's isolated and who's not. And then we ask a bunch of questions about that. So, we mark them and we put these marks on their back so we can tell them from a long distance away. We look at them through telescopes and binoculars, and we have ear tags on them so we can know who they are when we catch them, and so we can update their marks. And we follow them throughout their lives. On average, they live about 4.5 years. However, many of the animals, half the animals, die within their first year of life. So the pups have a hard time making it through that first winter. Having said that, some animals, the oldest animals we've had, are 16 years old. And we've turned the study, and we're doing a lot now with aging and senescence. and trying to understand, is sociality good for you, and how is sociality good for you? And what's really interesting is, I'm going to stop sharing that. What's really interesting is that if you're a human, being socially connected to others is good for you. In other words, one way of thinking about this is if you're socially isolated from others, that's about as bad for longevity, for how long you're going to live, as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, which is bad for longevity. So unlike humans, marmots don't really like each other that much, I don't think. And if you're nice to each other, and if you're socially connected to others, you die sooner, which is interesting. But it does say that sociality is that lever, is that factor that influences longevity. And one of the things we're trying to understand is, when is sociality good? When is it costly? And how can we look for what might be called social buffering? So we know that living with others, for humans at least, if you have a good friend and you have a bad day at school or work, and you come home and you can sort of dump and explain, oh my God, I had such a bad day at work and school today. Being able to have a friend who can listen to you and sympathize with you is actually really good. And that's called social buffering, and that reduces our stress. So do marmots socially buffer? Can they socially buffer? How would animals socially buffer? One way they socially buffer is by grooming each other. Another might be by huddling together and staying with each other. So we have marmots living in all sorts of different social groups and all sorts of different compositions of social groups. And we're looking for evidence of social buffering. And we find some evidence of social buffering for mothers in low predation risk areas. So mothers in low predation risk areas who have more affiliative interactions with others have reduced stress hormones. And if they have reduced stress hormones, they're giving reduced stress hormones to their babies through their milk. And if they're doing that, it turns out offspring of high stress mothers don't survive well. So there's this social buffering that seems to help mothers, and only really mothers, in low predation risk environments. If there's too much predation risk, everyone's stressed out and you don't have that benefit. So one of the things we're learning is that, and one of the big questions we're asking with the study is, why be social? Why do you want to hang out with others when you get parasites from them, when you have to share food? I mean, who wants to share food and who wants parasites? So why be social? And there may be benefits, and one of these benefits may be social buffering. And what we're looking at, hopefully in the future, with new genetic tools and genomic tools, is we're trying to understand how social buffering may reduce stress for young animals, and how this may influence health and longevity throughout lives. And the really important thing that I think we're able to look at, which is why not only is this interesting to understand animal behavior, but also human behavior, is we find all these context-specific situations when it's potentially good or bad to be social. And that's a lot of our work. So we do a lot of other things. Austin Nash is here. Austin was a student last summer, published a paper. And if Austin wants to share in a few minutes, moments explaining what he did last summer and the insights from that, that'd be great. If he doesn't, that's okay. I can tell marmot stories, forever. Austin.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my name's Austin Nash. I'm a master's, bachelor's combined student at the University of Colorado. I spent last summer with the Marmot Project, had probably the best summer of my life. It was really a great time. And so what I was looking at is, one thing you might notice about marmots is how loud they are. They're named whistle pigs. They'll sort of shriek at you almost. And these alarm calls are quite important for letting other individuals know that there's a predator in the area, or letting the predator know that the marmot sees them. And for me, I work on Wyoming ground squirrels right now, and they'll let you know that you see them, and they'll yell at you, and they'll essentially tell you to go away. But one thing we were interested in is what sort of influences these alarm calls. So we know that external factors influence alarm calling in certain species. So one of them is called an audience effect, and that's basically Dr. Blumstein wouldn't be giving this video lecture if there's no one watching. So that sort of external context can influence when an individual calls. And we were specifically interested in about internal factors, so like parasite load and how that influences alarm calling. So we looked at a couple different parasites, some from the fecal samples that we collect and some from the blood samples, and we were interested in seeing how they influence alarm calling. And I guess I'll highlight one result to talk about context dependence. So we calculate this metric from the blood samples called the neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio. So that's basically just counting two types of blood cells, and it gives you an index of how activated an individual's immune system is. And we found that higher immune system activation actually led to higher levels of alarm calling, but only in male marmots. The relationship was not found in female marmots. So some of the ideas we had about this is from previous work, we know that males are more stressed, so that might be why they sort of hit this threshold and start alarm calling more. But that's another example of how even within the different sexes, there can be context that influences the life history of these animals.
And that's sort of something that emerges from many of our studies, that pups are playing one game to survive that first summer, then survive the winter. They have to eat a lot. Adults are playing another game. They want to get fat, but then they want to breed. They want to be dominant. That benefits and costs are very context specific and cohort specific. And while we're all humans, while these are all marmots, it's not as though there's a unitary explanation for many of the phenomena that we see in nature. And we're sort of teasing that apart and really highlighting some of those things. We've done a lot with alarm calling because it's so obvious. So with that, I'm going to say, let's open it up to questions, and happy to try to answer things. And any chat?
I'm going to go do some field work, but it was good talking with all of you.
Take care, Austin. Nice seeing you.
Thanks for sharing.
I think our junior marmoteer, it looked like she had a field experiment of her own that she did. Did you do a field experiment that you want to show a marmot scientist?
Oh yeah, data.
Data. Oh, did you do a track play?
Oh, cool.
You got to unmute yourself, or do we have to unmute them?
We're unmuted.
There we are.
Unmuted.
Yeah. Tell us what you saw.
Line on there.
Yeah.
A squiggly line.
Squiggly line, like a tail, maybe?
Maybe. What kind of animals do we have in our backyard? Speak up.
Birdies.
I know, but what kind of rodents? That's what they're interested in. We have chipmunks. What does Gunny like to chase?
Chipmunks.
Squirrels.
Yeah, and squirrels.
And do you remember what we have in Arkansas that's similar to a marmot?
Woodchucks.
We'll say groundhog? Yeah.
There's bugs in here.
Yeah, we got bugs in our experiment.
Marmot too.
Yeah. Well, what other kinds of big rodents have you seen? What about when we went on the river? What did you see?
River otter.
That's right, Brady. We saw a river otter.
Oh, cool. I love river
We were
otters.
in a river otter on North Sillamore Creek.
Very cool.
Well, can you remember your favorite place to visit ground squirrels in Colorado?
Yeah.
Do you remember the name?
No.
We've taken the kids to St. Elmo every summer.
Oh yeah, those chipmunks will eat right out. They're ferocious.
They are
All
ferocious.
over your body. Have you been there before, Ann or Dan?
And one time it scared our mommy.
It did
Yeah,
scare
I
me.
believe it.
Yeah.
Believe it.
I think I've got a pack rat outside my house that I think it's active during the day, and it's sort of being a bivouac every day because it gets trashed. I don't know where it's getting trashed. I mean, I have no idea where it's getting this stuff. And then it sort of makes a pile, and then it puts some green vegetation in it. So I should probably do this week's exercise and put out a track plate and see what footprints are there. But every day I come and I take it and throw it away, because I don't want the pack rat in my house. Because if they get in, they cause quite the mess.
They are.
Yeah.
Or, Dan, is it a marmot building some kind of puzzle box for you? And it's curious take to
It
figure
could
it
be
out.
because it's active during the day. So if you go to our Instagram page or our Twitter feed, what you see is all these videos of marmots and puzzle boxes doing cool things because we are interested in cognition. And we know that marmots are smarter than we are. So you're right, and it could be a marmot doing a puzzle box for me.
You need more data.
I should get a game
Well,
camera.
I had a
put it there,
question.
see what happens. Actually, I should do that.
Yeah.
What's your
We have
question?
another
about
question?
marmot?
How do marmots live?
The oldest we have here in the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory area are 16 years. On average, most of them only live 4.5 years. But what's
You meant,
interesting?
like how high? What elevation? How about that?
Oh, how high? They go pretty much from sea level around Vancouver up to the tallest 14ers in the lower 48. So they have almost a 15,000 foot elevation range, which is pretty cool.
All the way to the bottom.
The sharpest part is
Dan, I'm curious how you decided to study marmots. How did you get into becoming an actual field scientist?
I like animals, and I've studied birds and mammals before, and I was looking for a graduate project, and I was taking time off before grad school, and I knew I wanted to work internationally, and I used to get paid to bicycle around the world, so I was mountain biking through Pakistan, and I came across this place with all these marmots, and a place called Khunjerab National Park, which is right on the Pakistani-Chinese border, and that was really high up. I mean, I lived at 14.3 and studied marmots up to over 15,000 feet, and did that for a number of years, and then had questions that I wanted to ask that really required marmots and looking at different species of marmots. So I initially applied to grad school with Ken Armitage, who started this whole project here in 1962. And I ended up not going to grad school with Ken, but when I realized I was going to study marmots, he said he was kind enough to show me how to study marmots. So I first came out here in, I think, 1987. And he, took time to teach me how to marmoteer. So then I wrote a grant to work with Ken as a postdoc after I got my PhD, and then studied marmots all over the place. And then was in Australia and working there for 3 years, and got a job in the US, and came back and said, Ken, I got some questions with marmots. Can I work with them? He's like, yeah, sure. He's like, by the way, I've sort of had it in the field. You can take over. I'm like, okay, got to keep this thing going. This is one of the longest studies of anything anywhere. And it's really special. And it's really special to have really sort of an intergenerational transfer of a study from, a senior investigator to a more junior investigator. And we've learned a lot, and we continue to learn a lot.
I'm curious. Oh, yeah. I'm curious, what's one of the strangest things you've learned about marmots over the years, or just that you found absolutely fascinating?
I think lots of things are fascinating, but I'm sort of into them. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, you shouldn't use animals as models for human morality or behavior. That's called the naturalistic fallacy. So it is kind of interesting that marmots inbreed, that if the most successful males we have stay around for a number of years, and they end up mating with their kids. And that's not good for them. It's, their kids have lower reproductive success, but it's actually probably making the best of a bad job. And in life, we see lots of making the best of a bad job. So we see inbred offspring from inbred matings actually having lower survival. And but since they only can reproduce once a year, that's the time to reproduce. Other things we've discovered are that, and this really opened my eyes to really plastic pollution and the scariness of plastic pollution. But if you're a rodent, you've got lots of siblings. And you can imagine a pea with a bunch of, little peas in a pod. And females have 2 uterine horns, and they have lots of babies in these uterine horns. So if you're a baby, you can be surrounded or next to, if you're a baby female, you could be next to, a male, 2 females, 2 males. And it depends. And what happens is during fetal development, hormones leak between the fetuses. So females surrounded by 2 males get androgenized. They get exposed to male sex hormones. And that changes them in ways that later makes them more masculine. So we know that this is natural variation. We don't know where they are because we don't do cesarean sections on them, but we know that if you're a female in a male biased litter, you have lots of brothers, you're going to be actually more male-like in your behavior. And we can sort of look at that and track that throughout the first couple of years of life and see there are consequences to that. So why does that scare me about plastic pollution? Well, it's the same hormones that are mimicked by some plastics that we have and that we are exposed to in the environment. And what we see are profound effects from natural variation in hormones these animals evolved to live with. And then you can only imagine what happens when you start interfering by having unnatural estrogen and testosterone mimicking chemicals that are found in plastics. So that was a big eye opener for me. There was someone who worked at Rumble years and years ago. I forget his name. He's a researcher at Berkeley, and he's really interested in environmental chemicals. And I sent him a bunch of blood, and he basically said, these are the cleanest samples we've ever analyzed in terms of pollution and plastics and things like that. So we probably should, make the new standard marmots at Rumble for clean living, animals. But at the end of the day, I think seeing that natural variation in these natural hormones have really profound effects on animals' life trajectories should make us be concerned about chemicals in the environment that we're all exposed to through consumption and other ways. Any other final questions?
Thank you. We kind of have to go.
Can you say thank you?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for doing your tracking plate too, to see what kind of rodents were in your backyard.
And you
Now you
can
go try to